Hi all, let's get your Unit 3 notes out and let's look at civil rights. The year is 1963. So usually I start with a literacy test, which is linked there. This will be one of your discussion activity choices today, so it's linked in discussions as well. This literacy test was meant to stop black and brown and poor white people from voting. The questions are deliberately confusing. You only have 10 minutes to complete it, and if you miss one question, you're considered illiterate and therefore you cannot vote. The clerk giving it to you also gets to decide what the answers are. I think it's also helpful to look at the interactive map of white supremacy mob violence against people of color. I'll show the time lapse while I'm talking. If we look in the Deep South, we see lots and lots of violence against people of color. We can click on each dot and see what was happening there. As you can see, most of it was happening in the Deep South, so many African Americans wanted to move to the North. I'll stop here and we'll just click on any dot. So, a person lynched in 1946 on the suspicion of stealing a saddle from his white employer. And some of these have no names, just an individual who was lynched. People of color began to flee the South and go to northern cities. This is called the Great Migration. It happens from 1910 to 1970. As you can see, people are going to Chicago, Detroit, Cleveland, New York, all of these places. This leads to something called white flight from cities, where white people leave for the suburbs. Anyways, that leads us to the Green Book. For 30 years, a New York City mailman by the name of Victor Green wrote and distributed the Green Book, a travel guide for African American motorists. Now, to be clear, this isn't your average AAA guide of providing the hot spots to travel to. This was actually a lifesaver for black folks during the heights of segregation in the U.S. from 1936 to 1966. The Green Book helped black travelers navigate the dangers and constant humiliations that racial segregation posed. Discrimination was so real that not only did black travelers pack their own food but also their own gas. The person who digitized this learned about the Green Book in 2001 after a family friend passed away, and his friend's 80-year-old grandfather asked him to find a Green Book so he could travel down south to the funeral. The grandfather hadn't been outside of New York and thought even in 2001 that he needed this book to travel safely as a black man. Now we have it digitized. This will be your second choice for discussions today. You can either choose the literacy test or you can take a trip through the Green Book. So to take the trip, we click on Map a Trip. Let's just say we're going from New York to Atlanta, Georgia, and you can see it takes you way out of your way and you only have a few places to stop. You can also click on each area and see where it is listed in the Green Book. All right, enter Martin Luther King. Martin Luther King Jr. protested a lot of these inequalities. Dude was not liked by J. Edgar Hoover, who led the FBI. In fact, they sent him a letter pretending to be a black person telling King to kill himself. So you can read that there if you so wish. We are going to look at laws in Birmingham because that is kind of the place, the hotspot for civil rights protests and change. So you're going to read some Birmingham laws in your discussion thread, but I wanted to show you some images from the protests in Birmingham against those laws. First, this is Bull Connor. He's the chief of police in Birmingham. He wants to keep segregation in place. Protesters are boycotting businesses that segregate. They're protesting, they're visiting places that segregate, and sitting in white sections. They're out in the streets. They're confronting society. I want you to notice they're all wearing their Sunday best. They felt they needed to dress really nicely so white people would accept their humanity instead of labeling them as thugs or criminals. Then we have the Children's March. So even children decided to protest. You can imagine how this looked in newspapers and film reels to have police beating children with batons. They set dogs on them, they sprayed them with really painful, powerful fire hoses, and all of this was televised. So here we have some of those images of dogs attacking people. Again, people dressed in their Sunday best. These people are kneeling outside of the Capitol building, I believe, getting sprayed with fire hoses. And these pictures were everywhere. It's kind of the first time something like that was televised and the whole world was watching. Boycotts were very painful for businesses in Birmingham. So here's Martin Luther King along with two other prominent civil rights activists at the negotiation table. You'll read more about those negotiations in discussions. Before you head over there, I do have a few videos and resources on modern racism. I'd like to know if you think we still have racism in our society or if we've moved past it. I also have project ideas as well.